Guten Abend, ladies and gentlemen. Today we will speak in English, and I'm very pleased and happy to see so many of you. To thank from our team, but also from the children, from the voices, to be that you are become to be those who are listening them. Today we will tell more. Today we will go deeper into the topic of forcible deportation of Ukrainian children. And I would like to start this evening, not yet the discussion, with the quotation of Olena Zelenska. In her address to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, she stressed that so far we have managed to return 388 children. In total, there are more than 90,000 children in Russian captivity. At this rate, it will take 50 years to return them. And I would like to invite you to think about this 50 years. Right now, by this forcible deportation, Russia not just stolen their childhood, they are stolen also the time. They are stolen the right of these children to be protected, to have their family, to be with their family, to have a home, to have education. As for example, today, my childhood school was bombed in morning shelling. And today, I want to invite you to not forget to think that each time when you spend in time, when you give in time to think about these children who are deported, you are helping them to return, because the most important to listen, the most important to not forget, to not get too used to this. And that's why I'm very, very happy that today we can welcome on this stage not just our speakers of the discussion, but also the representative. And by this, I'm inviting to the speech Florian Hauer, Permanent Secretary for Federal and European Affairs and International Relations, State of Berlin Delegate to the Federation.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Red Town Hall and thank you for coming this evening. We especially appreciate your presence here today because our topic this evening, the forced deportation of Ukrainian children, is not an easy one, but it is important and deserves our fullest attention. Russia invaded Ukraine nearly 2 years ago. Since then, Ukrainians have fought for their freedom every day. And not only the soldiers, but as in every war, it is, above all, also the civilians who suffer from the attacks. In fact, 7.5 million Ukrainian children alone have been affected by Russia's war of aggression. Many have been forced to flee. Many have witnessed their closest relatives being injured or killed, and all deeply traumatized as a result. The exhibition War Diaries, the unheard voices of Ukrainian children, provides a first-hand account of their heartbreaking stories. You are all very welcome to visit the exhibition in the Hall of Arms after tonight's discussion. But Ukraine's children are suffering in other ways as well. In the last 2 years, tens of thousands of them have been kidnapped and taken to Belarus and Russia. There, they are forcibly adopted and subjected to military training and indoctrination. The goal? To instrumentalize these children against Ukraine, their own homeland. All these strategies clearly show that Russia's aim is more than a military victory over Ukraine. Putin seeks to destroy the Ukrainian nation, Ukrainian culture, and the Ukrainian identity. And I'm shocked and horrified by these inhuman actions and exploitation of children for political purposes, especially as a father of 2 children, and my son is also just as old as one of the kids shown out there. We condemn these crimes and we demand a full investigation. All these kidnapped children must be identified and reunited with their families. Ukraine is fighting for its children and its freedom. The struggle is visible in our city too. Berlin's Ukrainian community has grown a lot in the last 2 years. 400,000 people came to Berlin and were registered and received initial support here. About 65,000 have stayed. Today, they are the Berlin's second largest international community and enrich the life of our city. A number of organizations play a key role in raising awareness of the Ukrainian community here in Berlin and connecting its members. One important example is Vice. Mrs. Yakubovska, since the start of the war, you and your colleagues have organized countless demonstrations, cultural events, and educational programs. You build bridges between Ukrainians and Berliners. You draw attention to the Ukrainian community and our city. You remind us of Ukrainians' fight against Russia. You can be proud of your engagement, and I thank you everyone involved for their work. I am delighted that we can support your efforts here at the Red Town Hall tonight, because Berlin stands with Ukraine in this fight. We support our Ukrainian friends here in Berlin and in their homeland. The Ukrainian flags flying here in front of the Red Town Hall and at many official buildings throughout the city are a clear sign of our support for the Ukraine. So is our new city partnership with Kiev, along with many of cooperative efforts taking place at the official level and in society. This commitment, the close partnership between Berlin and Kiev, matters a great deal to the governing mayor personally. He has been a driving force behind the city partnership. Unfortunately, Kai Wegner is unable to join us tonight, but he asked me to share his heartfelt greetings today. And he hopes to see you all on February 24th at the Brandenburg Gate at the demonstration to mark the 2-year anniversary of the Russian attack. He also takes part in Café Kiev next Monday. I imagine and I hope that you will all be there as well. This evening's discussion will not be an easy one, but it is important. Our job is to see what is happening and to learn about the brutal tactics Putin and Russia are employing in this war. It is a question of Ukraine's visibility, but it is also a question of the ideas we share for a peaceful, free, secure and united Europe. That should be the goal we are all looking and working toward. Thank you for joining us this evening. And now it's you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you.
So this very rare occasion, I will speak not German, but English. Dear Mr. Secretary Hauer, dear Lesia, who should be joining us online, dear Eva, ladies and gentlemen, Pani Panova. In March last year, the International Criminal Court issued 2 arrest warrants for the unlawful deportation of Ukrainian children. One of them for Mr. Putin and one for his Commissioner for Child Abduction, as she's now named. Shortly afterwards, I got a call from my German friend who said, you know, this is something German media, German community does not know anything about. We must change it. It was an alarming call and a call to action. So we combined our efforts and managed to bring the case of the abducted children to the German Bundestag. In the very first session week after the summer break, we held 2 major parliamentary events, a large public event with the participation of leading media and a closed parliamentary breakfast. And as a quite often visiting such breakfasts, I can certainly confirm the success of this event. It was attended by a large number of parliamentarians and media representatives. Daria Hrystyna Hranovska, the Presidential Commissioner for Children's Rights, and child rehabilitation came to Berlin for that occasion, but the main guest was 11-year-old Ilya from Mariupol, whom she accompanied. Russians killed Ilya's mother, wounded him, and then abducted him. And the main cure they gave to Ilya was brainwashing. Ilya's grandmothers saw him on television in one of those Russian propaganda shows. She was lucky enough to be able to bring him back home. And Ilya told his story to the members of the German parliament that day with permission and supervision of child psychologist and his heroic grandmother, of course. And I think we made quite a difference that day. Both media and parliamentarians were given some real data about that. A few weeks later, the German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock made this terrible issue one of the main topics of her visit to United Nations General Assembly. And civil society launched a petition calling on the government and the Bundestag to address the issue. So I'm delighted to see co-authors of that petition here in important Rathaus. All those activities were carried out in the framework of the major program Bring Kids Back UA. This program, initiated by President Zelensky, is an integral part of his 10 steps peace formula, Ukrainian peace formula, point 4 of which is release of all prisoners and deportees. It was Vice President of the German Bundestag, Katrin Göring-Eckardt, who we invited to launch the conference, conference in December. We knew she would accept, and we were right. She took part in the second round, and just yesterday in Kiev, Katrin met Ksenia and Rostik, another 2 children who were returned to Ukraine after deportation and abduction. And just 2 weeks ago, Germany joined our coalition at governmental level. Now 28 foreign countries, foreign ministries are working together, not just to tackle this issue, but to solve the problem as a whole. There is no international mechanism for the return of abducted children. And again, we have a precedent. This whole story is definitely not a solo effort of our embassy. From the very beginning, it has been a joint effort of many of us, including media representatives, civil society, members of the government and the German Bundestag. And of course, many German people with big heart. And I'm convinced that we all must speak one voice in the face of Russia's war and Russia's war crime. This story is not a success story either, knowing for sure that over 19,000 Ukrainian children have been abducted, assuming that there could be more than 200,000 of them, and Russians tell us about many 100,000 of abducted children. And having returned only 387 of them so far cannot be called a success. While intergovernmental work is underway to find a legal and effective solution, it is the duty of each of us to talk about those children, to organize events as today Vicha did, to organize such great exhibition here, because those exhibitions are telling very personal stories. And this is for me, as for diplomat, is got one of the most important instruments to reach out to the people, to tell our personal stories, my personal stories. But just imagine those stories you can see here, or you can hear today, like the story from 12 years old Oleksandr, one of the returnees. The Russians said that my mother did not need me and that I would be given to a foster family in Russia. It's a crime. Or just imagine what the children in Ukraine are for stories are telling. I still remember that my grandmother and grandfather told me stories about bombing and Nazi Germany occupation of the Western Ukraine. And I, as a small child, thought, well, thanks God, we live in peaceful times. Now, imagine they told the stories how they experienced this war as teenagers. And now my daughter, Anastasia, will tell her children some 100 and whatever years after the World War II, she will tell their grandchildren the story how she survived under Russian bombings. Just imagine, centuries, and we still experience those war crimes and wars, which will be seen by our unprotected children. Well, Russia pretends that it does nothing wrong. Russia pretends that it cares for children, but it sounds just like a farce. Russia pretends it fights against NATO or the whole Western civilization, but in reality, it's waging war against Ukrainian children. And we will definitely win this war and bring our children back home. Thank you so much.
Thank you for these important words. It's always good to remember that Ukraine will win, definitely, but with the support and when we are united. Thank you, Mr. Hauer, for this, thanks to my team, Vice. And I would like to use this chance and thank the partner of this event, the Stiftung Erinnerungs Zukunft Verantwortung, but also Senat Berlin. It's very important to have this chance to speak about the deportation of kids in the middle, in the heart of Germany, in the middle of Berlin. Thank you for this chance. And also our partners as Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, Ukrainian Embassy, our Diaries team, and Pilecki Institute. Right now, I would like to invite to the speech, very important speech, with the visual history of what does mean Russian deportation of Ukrainian kids. I would like to invite Oleksandra Matviychuk, an esteemed Ukrainian human rights lawyer and civil society leader, ahead of the non-profit organization Center for Civil Liberties.
My name is Oleksandra Matviychuk. I am a human rights lawyer, head of the Center for Civil Liberties. It's a huge honor for me to address to this distinguished audience in Rotor Rathaus. I would like to wish you a fruitful discussion about a very important topic, about illegally deported Ukrainian children. When we speak about illegal deportation of Ukrainian children, we speak at least about several categories. The first categories are children who were deported together with their parents, and their destiny depends whether or not their parents found resources and energy to leave Russia as quickly as possible. The second category is children from the state institutions like orphanage, and we have no tool to track their destiny. The third category is children who were sent by their parents to summer camps in Russia during the battles on their territories. And when these territories were released, Russians refused to return their children back. And fourth category, they are children whose parents were killed by Russians or arrested and kept in infiltration camps by Russians. And even these children are preparing for a forcible adoption in Russian families, regarding that fact that they have families and relatives in Ukraine. We're in the cause of the war, and that is why we don't know numbers. Ukrainian officials identified almost 20,000 Ukrainian children being illegally deported to Russia, and only 388 of these children were able to return back. But Russian side said about more than 700,000 of Ukrainian children crossing the Russian borders. And we have no instruments either to prove or deny these figures. International Criminal Court last year issued arrest warrants against Russian President Vladimir Putin and his child commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova for the forcible deportation of Ukrainian children. International Criminal Court qualified these actions as war crimes. But this is much bigger than war crimes. It's a part of genocidal policy of Russian state. Putin and Russian top officials openly say that there is no Ukrainian nation, there is no Ukrainian language, there is no Ukrainian culture. And that is why Russian state take Ukrainian children to Russia to raise them up as Russians. And that is why when they cross Russian borders, these children are put in re-education camps where they tell that they are not Ukrainian children but Russian children, and then are preparing for forcible adoption in Russian family to bring them up as Russians. Let me share the story of 10-year-old Ilya from Mariupol. When the Russians circled the city, they didn't grant permission for the International Committee of Red Cross to evacuate civilians. As a result, Ilya and his mother, like thousands of others in Mariupol, sought refuge in the basement of their residential buildings. They melted snow for water and made fires to cook what little food they had. However, when their supplies ran out, they were needed to leave the basement. Suddenly, they found themselves in the center of Russian attacks. Ilya's mother was struck in the head, and the boy was seriously injured. Despite the dangers, his mother bravely carried him to a friend's apartment. At that moment, there was no medical care assistance available, because the Russians had intentionally destroyed the maternity hospital in Mariupol, along with entire medical infrastructure. So they simply lay on a couch, hugging to each other. Ilya later told my colleague that his mother died and froze in his arms. However, that's not the end of the story. When Russians occupied the city, they forcibly transferred Ilya to Russia. His family made enormous effort to bring him back home. This topic is highly sensitive for Ukrainian society because the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children vividly illustrate that we are not just fighting for the freedom to be an independent state but not Russian colony, that we are not just fighting for a freedom to make our own democratic choice, but also about the freedom to preserve our Ukrainian identity and not to be compelled to re-educate our children as Russians. So I hope for a fruitful discussion today. We truly need your assistance to find comprehensive answers to the complex questions of how to return the thousands and thousands of illegally deported Ukrainian children to their homes.
And now I officially start in the part of the discussion of this event, and I'm inviting our guests who are joining us offline with us on the stage. That's Dr. Cecilie Hellestveit, a lawyer and social scientist with a PhD in international humanitarian law from the University of Oslo, involved in the OSCE Moscow Mechanism mission. And Anastasia Saienko, representative of the initiative Where Are Our People? And In Zoom, we have Mykola Kuleba, founder of Save Ukraine, a Ukrainian social and political activist and the former president and commissioner for children's rights. I believe we have some changes, and also later on we will have opportunity to speak with the representative from Ombudsman Office. That's Alla Tarasiuk, head of the Department for Monitoring of the Rights of the Child. She would be joining us instead of Irina Suslova, as we published, because of the emergency meeting, and we are thanking for this chance, we are thanking to speak. I just will remind that the first part of our discussion, that's the discussion which I will have honor to moderate, and the last part, there would be a Q&A session, and each of you would be able to raise and ask some questions. So, the first question would be for Mykola Kuleba. Basically, in your interviews, you quite often mention that Russia started preparing the law to facilitate the politics of deportation much earlier, to be precise, in 2018. Could you please specify these law changes before full-scale invasion, which made possible such a scale of children deportation?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for invitation. It is a very important issue because it's hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian children are hostages in Russia and occupied territories, and with families or without families. And answering your question, in 2018, Putin made changes to the decree on the powers of the president of the Russian Federation issued by him, the last version of which was issued in 2002, which speaks on the individuality of decision-making without coordination with other authorities. He granted himself the right to determine the category of persons who can receive citizenship of the Russian Federation under a simplified procedure. In 2020, after 18 years, he further simplified the previously simplified procedure for acquiring Russian citizenship by certain categories of persons and shortened the period of residence on the territory of the Russian Federation required for submitting the relevant application to 1 year. And as that was not enough, he directly defined the category of persons who have his right and this right, and among them, it is directly indicated citizens of Ukraine, including children and native speakers of the Russian language. Moreover, at the same time, changes were made to the simplified procedure for recognition a person as a native speaker of the Russian language. And from now on, citizens of Ukraine who speak Russian are recognized as a native speakers of the Russian language without an interview and can immediately go to the simplified procedure for getting Russian citizenship. In order to resolve the issue of acquisition of Russian citizenship by Ukrainian children, they granted the right to submit a relevant application on behalf of the child of guardians, heads of institutions for children, including educational and medical ones. The child's option, of course, is not taken into account. Therefore, it is enough to enroll a Ukrainian child in an educational institution or put him or her for treatment. And the director or the chief doctor has the right to submit an application for the acquisition of Russian citizenship for the child under a simplified procedure. As for guardians, Ukrainian children are placed under so-called temporary guardianship. This means that the future guardian is not required to pass the necessary check there regarding financial support, availability of housing, does not need to receive a health certificate, does not need a certificate from the physiatrist or narcologist, such as a certificate of no criminal record. That is, a guardian of a Ukrainian child who ended up on Russian territory without parents, and before that the Russian simplified kidnapped her, can become the first average person, both a man and a woman. At the same time, this temporary guardianship have the same right as the permanent ones, and therefore have the right to apply for citizenship. Well, already in March 2022, Putin used his right, which he granted to himself in 2018, and defined the category of persons who can receive Russian citizenship according to a simplified procedure. And this special category of children became orphans from the so-called DDPR and LPR and all of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kuleba. I believe we're still waiting that Alla Tarasiuk will also join us on this discussion. Then I will pass the question to Dr. Cecilie Hellestveit. Just short, brief explanation. What does mean this Moscow mechanism mission?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Now, the Moscow mechanism is one of the fact-finding mechanisms of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Now, as you know, this is the regional organization for security in Europe, and it has 57 states. And in most of the mechanisms under the OSCE, it's based on consensus. Now, consensus means that every single state has a veto, which means that most of the mechanisms do not work in the current situation. The Moscow mechanism is based on 2/3 a qualified majority, which means that it can work. So when 2/3 of the states come together and decide to put together a fact-finding mission to Ukraine, so they do. So there were 2 Moscow mechanisms in 2022 regarding the violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law during the first phase of the Russian war of aggression. And then last year, there was a new mechanism established concerning the deportation and forceful transfer to Russia of Ukrainian children. And I was a part of that mission. We were 3 international experts, and we wrote a report on this issue, which was presented then to the OSCE in last spring. Now, that means that there is an independent report, fact-finding, which is supposed to have quite a lot of authority in terms of the facts and in terms of the legal situation, what norms, what international legal norms are in fact violated. And this, of course, when it comes to the Ukrainian children deported to Russia or in the hands of the Russian belligerent, this is perhaps one of the issues in this very complex legal landscape, which is the simplest. There is only one rule. It is prohibited for a belligerent to keep children belonging to the enemy belligerent in its hands. It is a war crime. That is the case. There are no exceptions to this rule. Unlike most other rules under international law, this is a rule without exceptions. So that is basically the main finding of the report, is that there is a system in Russia to transfer Ukrainian children into Russian hands and into Russia, but there is no system, and Russia is obliged under international law to have a system to transfer these children out of Russia as soon as possible, preferably back to Ukraine. But if that is impossible, Russia is under an obligation to transfer them to third countries because it is the very presence of these children in the hands of the Russian belligerent which is the core of the illegality.
Thank you. And I have a question for this third report of the Moscow mechanism published on 4th May 2023. Has a much narrower scope dealing with the forcible transfer of children within parts of Ukraine's territory, temporary control or occupied by Russia, and or their deportation. I quotating right now, the activation of Moscow mechanism for the establishment of an independent expert mission on violation and abuses committed in the war of the Russian Federation supported by Belarus against Ukraine. While report acknowledged support from Belarus, it did not provide specific details or delve into Belarus' contribution to the deportation of children. Could you please clarify what was discovered regarding Belarus' involvement in this matter?
Now that is an interesting question because the mandate was most specifically about the children in Russian hands. We did know about the reports concerning Ukrainian children in Belarus. We also wrote it in our report, 4 different types of forcible transfer or deportation to Belarus, linked to medical evacuation, linked to the initial phase of the war where retreating Russian forces brought with them children back, linked to these summer camps, and also linked to a transfer like under the Russian system. So a new number of different types of transfers, basically, also to Belarus. But at the time when we were working with this, the reports were premature. So we decided to focus our efforts on the situation in Russia and in Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine. A lot of more information has come to light after we handed in our report. So I do think that that is basically an issue that the report did not really include. Of course, there are very disturbing reports about the children in Belarus. And although under international law, as I was saying, the core of the illegality is for the enemy belligerent, meaning Russia as the aggressor, to keep Ukrainian children in Russian hands. But due to the relationship between Russia and Belarus, it would amount also to a very problematic situation and probably also IHL violations to keep them in Belarus due to the kind of link basically between Russia and Belarus. Because the protection in these rules is about the children not being brought up in an environment where they are basically naturally set up against their own families, their origins, their history, and their own state. Because children are not supposed to be instrumentalized by belligerent states in this manner. And if Russia uses Belarus to do this, it would amount to a similar situation because the rules intend to protect the children against this type of instrumentalization, to protect the children themselves, but also their families, but also the state of the children against this unbearable prospect of losing the children to the war. And this is the core of this crime, that it is basically the loss of the identity of these children. It is when you are present in a state at war, the propaganda, the constant narratives will be so strong that children are not able to withstand them. So over time, they will be lost to Ukraine. And this is basically why this is such a serious crime, and it is with time, it becomes more serious. And let me just say one final thing, because we write about the treatment of the children in Russian hands. Now, there is a panoply of violations under human rights law and under humanitarian law. However, we are used to thinking about the best interests of the child. And in this situation, there is only basically one interest of the child that it is to be removed from the hands of the Russian belligerent. However, if Russia were to treat these children very well, even better than Russian children, it doesn't change the situation. It actually aggravates the situation because it is the assimilation process that is the core of the crime. So basically, very good treatment does not correct the situation, it actually makes it even more serious.
Thank you. Thank you for this. And I would like to ask our team if Alla Tarasiuk join us. We have screens, yes. Meanwhile, I'm waiting the sign of our technician team. I will address to Anastasia Saienko the next question. On your platform, you work with the testimonies of deported children. Could you elaborate on the conditions of how children are being deported? As we have already heard that it still doesn't change the fact of the crime, but still, I mean, it's very much bring the bigger scale of this crime.
Thank you for your question and for invitation. So really, where are our people? Our campaign is aimed to prove that the forcible deportation of Ukrainian children, it's not a random cruelty of war. It's continuous policy from Russian Empire, from Soviet Union, and to highlight this cruel policy, we talk with children, we talk with witnesses and victims of this deportation, and according to our data, those children were deported by bus or by trains because Donetsk and Lugansk regions were occupied almost for 10 years, and they have had a very good connection with Rostov, Voronezh, and other border cities. So we have at least 3 cases. The first one is orphanages, when Russian occupants deported all entire orphanages, and it's very sad because we don't know exactly how many people there are. We have lists, but there in Russia. They transported to Belarus, as said before, and to another regions of Russia. The second case is sometimes parents should sign some documents, but we understand that those documents were signed under the pressure, so it couldn't be the basis of deportation. And the third case, they deported our children under the guise of health improvement measures. So they go to some camps for relax, for example, to Crimea, to Belarus, to Russian Federation, different cities. And children can't return back. Sometimes parents should do some NDA testing, for example, or sometimes Russian politicians say that they couldn't return our children because of Ukrainian military action on these territories. So the question of time is very important for us because those children are growing up in a Russian-speaking environment. They take part in paramilitary organizations such as Young Army, though they Russians try to bring some people who don't remember their homeland, they don't remember their home language. So we should. Our children requires careful monitoring and adequate response of international community. So this discussion is very important for this question. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have a sign that Alla Tarasiuk is joining us online. Thank you for being with us. The first very short question also about the numbers, so we will have in mind the scale of the deportation. Based on last numbers, how many children have been illegally displaced according to the data provided by the Ukrainian Permanent Commissioner for Human Rights, Dmytro Lubinets?
Шановні парламентарі, колеги, добрий вечір. Щиро дякую за надану можливість бути почутою і говорити відверто про воєнні злочини, які вчиняє Російська Федерація саме зараз в Україні проти українських дітей.
Esteemed parliamentarians, dear colleagues, I am sincerely grateful for the opportunity to be heard and to speak frankly and openly about the crimes which have been committed and are still being committed by the Russian Federation in Ukraine against the Ukrainian children.
Безпрецедентна агресія Росії чинить значний негативний вплив на забезпечення прав дітей на території України, і невинні діти стають все частіше ціллю, а не випадковими жертвами діянь представників Російської Федерації.
Russia's unprecedented aggression causes a significant negative influence on the state of observance of the rights of children on the territory of Ukraine. And innocent minors often become targets, purposeful targets of Russia's direct attacks.
Згідно з даними Державного порталу «Діти війни», станом на сьогодні, на 15 лютого 2024 року, було ідентифіковано 19 546 дітей, депортованих до Російської Федерації чи Республіки Білорусь, або примусово переміщених на тимчасово окуповані території України.
According to the information available via the state portal Dite Vine, or Children of War, currently as on the 15th of February 2024, 19,546 children who were deported to the Russian Federation or the Republic or of Belarus or forcibly transferred to the temporarily occupied territories were identified.
За даними Національного інформаційного бюро, близько 4 тисяч із них – це діти-сироти і діти, позбавлені батьківського піклування.
According to the data provided by the National Information Bureau, nearly 4,000 of them are orphans or children deprived of parental care.
За інформацією російських ЗМІ, які посилаються на оборонні відомства країни-окупанта, до Російської Федерації у незаконний спосіб було примусово перевезено понад 744 тисячі українських дітей.
According to the information provided by the Russian mass media, which in their turn adhere to the data provided by the defense bodies of the aggressor state, more than 744,000 Ukrainian children have been illegally transferred to the Russian Federation.
Але тут слід зазначити, що жодній міжнародній організації, а в жодній країні росіяни не надають інформації, хто ці хто ці діти, звідки вони, де вони зараз і в яких умовах перебувають.
We shall mention, however, that so far it's not possible to verify this number by any available means, since the Russian provide no information to any international organization or a state. They provide no information regarding the identities of the children, where they were taken from, where they reside now, and in which conditions they remain.
Масова депортація і цілеспрямоване викрадення українських дітей – це спланована геноцидна політика Російської Федерації, яка вчиняється з 2014 року.
Mass deportation and the targeted abduction of Ukrainian children is a targeted genocidal policy of the Russian Federation, which has been in progress since 2014.
Російська Федерація депортує українських дітей, не здійснюючи заходів щодо пошуку їхніх родичів, не інформує українську сторону про таке переміщення, про те, куди, яким чином і влаштовує таких дітей в російські родини.
the Russian side deports Ukrainian children without taking any measures regarding the search of the relatives and without informing the Ukrainian side of such transfers. Instead, it finds Russian families for such children to be placed in.
За даними лабораторії гуманітарних досліджень Єльської школи, було виявлено щонайменше 2442 дитини з України, які були вивезені до Білорусі з початку повномасштабного вторгнення Росії в Україну.
According to the data provided by the Laboratory of Humanitarian Research of the Yale School of Public Health, it was discovered that at least 2,442 children have been taken since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Russia, have been taken from Ukraine to Belarus.
Тут слід зазначити, що відповідно до Римського статуту незаконна депортація і примусове переміщення цивільного населення, зокрема дітей, можуть бути кваліфіковані як злочини проти людяності або воєнні злочини.
It is necessary to mention here that in accordance with Article 7 and 8 of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, illegal deportations and forced transfer of civilian population, in particular children, can be qualified as crimes against humanity and/or war crimes.
Нам на сьогодні вдалося повернути в Україну 388 дітей. Кожна історія повернення, вона унікальна. Кожна повернута дитина – це наша ще одна перемога. І незважаючи на всі труднощі, ми боремося і продовжуємо боротися за те, щоб повернути кожну українську дитину.
So far, the Ukrainian side managed to return 388 children to the homeland. Each story of return is unique, and each returned child is yet another victory for us. Despite all challenges, we continue our fight in this regard, and we will continue to fight for every Ukrainian child until all of them are finally home.
Дякую.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. As it was already stressed in our discussion that not just in governmental level, but also on civil society level, everybody is doing everything possible to help to bring Ukrainian kids back home as soon as possible. And I would like to address the next question to Mr. Kuleba. You do a lot of work on the ground with the return of children. In your opinion, considering all the stories you have heard from the children themselves and their parents, why are Russians trying to adopt Ukrainian children so quickly?
Thank you so much. We are joining our efforts together with the government because we are on the same page to bringing all kids back, because this war will continue when we will be able to take all our kids back. And Russians everywhere declare that they do not officially adopt Ukrainian children. But first, the authorities give our children Russian citizenship, then they are given to Russian families for care under custody. And then they give them up for adoption and as Russian children. But I want to emphasize that the main goal of this strategy is to assimilate Ukrainian children. 10 years have passed since the first invasion. Ukrainian children of Donbas and Crimea after 2014 lived and grew up under the pressure of Russian propaganda. We cannot even imagine how many of them became Russian by passport and mindset. How many Ukrainian children from these regions ended up in Russian families? Tens of thousands. And it doesn't matter whether they were adopted or live with their parents under Russian rule. They grow up as Russian children. I want to tell you a couple of examples of kids returned by Save Ukraine from Russian foster families. And just yesterday, your Bundestag Vice President Catherine Gerin-Eckardt visited our center in Kyiv. She spent almost 2 hours just talking with children about their stories, and children were witnessing her, how they've been kidnapped, and about their experience. And one of the child was Ksenia and Sergei. They were orphans, and they were separated by war, faced adversity when their village was occupied. Until February 2022, they lived in a foster family in Kharkiv region. Ksenia, influenced by Russian propaganda, enrolled in Russian technical school, while 11 years old Sergei, her brother, went to a camp in Krasnodar. Post the occupation, Sergei ended up in Russia. Unable to return to Ukraine, he joined a Russian foster family. His attempt to stay connected with Ksenia faced resistance from his new adoptive parents, who discouraged thoughts of returning home. Under mental pressure, Sergei distanced himself from his sister and lost faith in a homecoming. Recognizing the issue, Ksenia stayed in Russia and convincing Sergei to return. Overcoming manipulations, she brought him back, and she called to us, and we helped them to come back, where they are now safe and reunited. And Sergei now grew up in Ukrainian foster family, and he's happy, and they have opportunity be one family with Ksenia. I can tell you hundreds of stories of that children who've been brought back, and about that children who stays in Russia and who've been brainwashed or who've been hidden in Russia, in Russian families. And it is horrible stories, and it is genocide, as the Ombudsman office mentioned, that Russia committing genocide, kidnapping Ukrainian children. Thank you.
Thank you. As we have a lawyer on our platform, we definitely will ask this question. But before that, I would like to address the next question to Alla Tarasiuk once again in regard of the condition in which children are held, and specifically that in the report of the Ukrainian Ombudsman and the Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights, many crimes were mentioned. Children were not only forcibly displaced, separated from their families, denied their freedom and identity, but some of them were also coerced into joining the so-called Army. How dangerous is this for the future of children? That's the open question for all of us. But I would like to ask more specific question. Does there already have been such cases that Ukrainian children were not just forced to join the army, but was forced to fight on the front, or were forced to prepare to fight on the front? Thank you.
Дякую. Російська Федерація з 2014 року веде активну пропаганду служби в лавах власних Збройних сил України і зосереджує зусилля саме на дітях, на жаль.
Thank you so much for the question. So let me begin by mentioning the fact that since 2014, the Russian Federation has been conducting an active propaganda activities regarding the popularization of military service in its armed forces, concentrating its propaganda efforts mainly on children.
Нам всім потрібно розуміти і усвідомлювати, що мілітаризація дітей – це політика Російської Федерації, яка спрямована на формування лояльності неповнолітніх до використання силових методів у регулюванні таких міждержавних відносин.
We shall all understand that militarization of children is a targeted policy of the Russian Federation aimed at forming the loyalty of minors to the use of force method in regulating interstate relations, as a tool of regulating interstate relations.
Військово-патріотичне виховання і вербування дітей до юнармії – це одна із складових російського військового злочину і військового злочину Кремля саме.
So the propaganda activities aimed at establishing the positive image of armed forces is yet another crime of the Kremlin.
Тут так само дуже важливо усвідомлювати, що юнармія – це російська дитячо-юнацька мілітарна організація при Міністерстві оборони Російської Федерації. Вона відрізняється радикальною пропагандистською роботою, і найстрашніше, що членами такої організації можуть стати діти з 8 років.
UnArmia is a Russian children's and youth military organization functioning under the Ministry of Defense, which is distinguished by its radical propaganda work among Russian youth. The scariest thing is that children as young as 8 years old may become members of this movement.
Патріотично перевиховувати українських дітей і прищеплювати любов до нової батьківщини юнармія розпочала відразу після анексії Криму і окупації частини території Донецької і Луганської областей. Наших дітей системно вчили і вчать зараз ненавидіти Україну, щоб згодом вони були готові зі зброєю в руках вбивати саме українців.
UnArmia began to patriotically, in brackets, educate Ukrainian children, instilling love for their self-proclaimed new homeland immediately after the annexation of Crimea and the occupation of part of the territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Our children were systematically taught to hate Ukraine so that later they would be ready to go and kill Ukrainians with weapons and without any extra questions.
Пропаганда широко діє через освітню складову, тому що в деяких школах на окупованих територіях вступ до юнармії практично обов'язковий. За дітей, яким не виповнилося 14 років, підписують заяви їхні батьки. Навіть якщо батьки не хочуть і проти цього, але вони не можуть протистояти натиску провладного керівництва закладів освіти.
Propaganda works widely through the educational component. In some schools, joining the UnArmia is practically mandatory. Applications are signed for children who are under 14 by parents who, even if they are against such education, let us say so, cannot resist the onslaught of the pro-government management of the educational institutions.
Також важливо розуміти, що на окупованих територіях освіта використовується для пропаганди війни, для мілітаризації нового покоління і так званої мотивації добровільно йти на службу в Збройні сили Російської Федерації. Наприклад, в Донецькій, Луганській областях був наказ саме на окупованій території, за яким до мобілізаційного резерву могли залучатися хлопці від 16 років. В вересні 22-го в закладах освіти відбувалися спеціальні такі обов'язкові уроки, які називалися «Розмови про важливе» для виховання російських громадян.
In the occupied territories, education is used to promote war, militarize the younger generation, and create motivations to voluntarily serve in the armed forces of the Russian Federation. For instance, in the Donetsk and Luhansk region, there was an order according to which boys can, from the age of 16, join the so-called mobilization reserve. In September 2022, in educational institutions, there were held special mandatory lessons called important conversations or разговоры о важном in Russian, the purpose of which was to educate children, as they put it, as Russian citizens.
Слід відзначити, що мілітаризація освіти, про яку ми зараз говоримо і про яку говорили, зокрема, інші колеги і учасники саме панельної дискусії, і також пропаганда військової служби, яка спрямована на жителів окупованої території, вона заборонена міжнародним гуманітарним правом і заборонена саме 4-ю Женевською конвенцією.
It is worthwhile mentioning that the militarization of education and propaganda of military service aimed at the people residing in the occupied territories is prohibited by Article 51.1 of the Fourth Geneva Convention.
Дякую.
Thank you. And as we already mentioned this couple times by defining the crimes which Russia is right now committing in Ukraine, and by also stressing the article written by Putin in 2021, where he tried to convince everyone in Ukrainian and in Russian that Ukraine does not exist, I would like to address this main question, I must say, probably of this panel, that I will quote once again the report. The first two reports issued in April and July 2022 provide a general, comprehensive assessment of the violations of international humanitarian law and international humanitarian rights law, and of the alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Ukraine. End of quote. Do these Russian crimes committed in Ukraine have the common component of the genocide?
It's a complicated question. War crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide are often treated as the three international crimes, in addition to the crime of aggression, which is a different type of crime. And they are considered sometimes to be three more or less equal crimes. They are not. So genocide is the crime of all crimes. And unlike war crimes and crimes against humanity, the context of a genocide does not matter. So there are no legal rules that can stop something from being called a genocide if it is a genocide. Meaning, is there an armed conflict? Is there an international armed conflict? Is there jurisdiction? Is it a state? These things do not matter when it comes to genocide. Now, there is another thing which is different, and it is that war crimes and crimes against humanity is about what do you do? So, in the question of the deportation of children, the Russian state is actually deporting and forcefully transferring Ukrainian children. That is a fact. And there is a system that the Russian authorities are sustaining, introducing, and sustaining, and they do not have a separate system. Now, these are things that they do, and that is the crime. Genocide is not about what you do. I mean, it is about why you do it. And genocide is a prohibition on policy. So that is the international crime that prohibits every country in the world from having a genocidal policy. It means that the character of the crime is different, and you need to prove entirely different things. And they are very difficult to prove. You know that there are many processes going on before the ICJ concerning the Genocide Convention. Some of these processes are put in motion, perhaps not because we are talking about genocide per se, but because genocide is the crime of all crimes, and it has other legal implications, such as in Israel's war on Gaza. Now, the process can have the effect that Israel will not be able to get weapons. It's like Myanmar. Myanmar is before the International Court of Justice as well, with allegations of genocide. That changes policy towards Myanmar in most countries in the world. So, and these are effects that you do not see with war crimes and crimes against humanity in the same way. So genocide is a politically very sensitive crime these days. In the discussions or in the legal deliberations now before the International Court of Justice, not the International Criminal Court, but the International Court of Justice, there is discussion among states about whether the threshold for genocide is too high. It is very difficult to prove that a government or a state has an intention to eliminate a nation or a people in part or entirely. So there is a discussion among states about whether the world, the states of the world, should actually interpret the threshold for genocide and lower it. Now that is a general discussion that will be applied then to all situations. Let me take one example. In recent years, we have had legal processes where genocide has been confirmed, and that is the Islamic State towards the Yazidis. Now, Germany has been exemplary in this case, has been the first country to really prosecute these things. Why was that so easy? It was because the Islamic State had taken Muslim, old, ancient Muslim legal sources, the hadiths, justifying their campaign against the Yazidis. They had an ideology about exterminating the Yazidis. They had actually said that this is what we intend to do, and they conducted military operations with the intent to do so. They also kidnapped children with the express intention of exterminating the Yazidis. Now, that is not very difficult to prove, but most states do not operate in that way, which means that the proof in a court of law becomes very difficult. So this is, I'm not going to decide anything because that is not my position, but I do want to inform you about the challenges involved in the genocidal case. However, it is a fact that one of the elements of the crime of genocide is the assimilation of the children of the group. Either, well, this can happen in many ways. Now, transferring the children of the group and assimilating it into your group is one of the elements of genocide. And when you look at the system that the Russians have established for transferring children into Russia and to not really following how they are then being assimilated into the Russian population, obviously, this has a lot of similarities. But again, it comes down to this intention, the mens rea, and that is basically what has to be proven, and it is very difficult.
Thank you for this blurred answer. I will transfer for the next question, which involves and which requires the situation of the attention toward deportation of the children, because as we see, one of the non-official part of recognizing genocide is also the attention to this case. Anastasia, could you elaborate, as your platform, where our people is actively working for some time on raising awareness of deportation of Ukrainian children. Do you see any changes in the situation as of February 15, 2024?
Thank you. Our campaign works not only with children, but with the entire deportation system, including adults and civilian hostages. We created an encyclopedia which I'm involved as a historian and researcher, where we analyze the historical context, because we recognize that deportation have deep roots. More than 100 deportation processes were in Soviet Union. So Russia, as a successor, of Soviet Union continues this brutal policy. As for 2024, unfortunately, we see the situation has not changed much because the war continues, territories remain occupied, and Russia does not reduce the volume of weapons, despite the sanctions which are ineffective. The main obstacle of deportation of more people is that the Ukrainian army has strong defense. They doesn't allow the Russian occupants to seize new territories. Because when we observe new liberated territories, we see that these cities or villages are empty. We don't know what happened to those people. Maybe they were deported or they were killed. It's something like that Jewish settlements after the Second World War, in the same situation. And we argue not to consider deportation as a completed process because they are deporting our people now. And victory in the war, Ukrainian victory, is the main factor in restoring justice and returning our people back. If Russia wins, we will not get our children and our people back. Therefore, ensuring a victory and regaining control of our occupied territories is critical. International pressure will be ineffective if Russia wins. Now we see a situation where aid to Ukraine is constantly decreasing. It's important to understand when European or American politicians say that Ukraine does not need help. They say that let our children and our people will stay in Russia, let they be raped, militarized, kidnapped, and so on. And this what you are talking about when you say that Ukraine does not need help, because the war is not just a front line. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one little thing. Under the laws of armed conflict, under the Geneva Conventions, to which all countries in the world are ratifying parties, every single state in the world is obliged not only to respect these rules, but also to make sure that every country in the world respects these rules. When it comes to these children, when they have been transferred during an armed conflict with Ukraine, if the war were to end without a transfer back, Russia will always be obliged to transfer these children back. This requirement will not end although the war ends. These are obligations that will stay with these children until they are 100 years old. So these are one of the kind of obligations that will not end although the war ends, just to be very specific about that.
Yes, and especially when we think that when we understand that the war is going on for 10 years right now, and the children who were born during the war, during the time as war started, they right now went for the forced class. And to imagine that they are getting older, they are stopping being children, but Russia is continuing to commit crimes. And the main intents of event like our events or any other panel, any other public words, it's to raise the awareness. Therefore, I would like to address the next question to Mr. Kuleba. Save Ukraine regularly organized rescue missions to return deported children from Russia. This was 5th mission so far. I congratulate you with this success. 15th mission organized. How can people here, civil society, decision makers, help in the process of returning deported Ukrainian children?
Thank you. It is very important discussion right now, and I clearly understand that to prove a war crime, to prove genocide, it's not easy. We need a longer period of time But I believe that we will prove, and United Nations, International Criminal Court, we will prove this, but we want it happen earlier. And we call on the public sector of Germany, NGOs, decision makers, and all those who care to demand that your government recognize the assimilation of Ukrainian children as genocide of the Ukrainian people. You can create petitions, write letters, hold events like this event on this topic, recognizing the assimilation of Ukrainian children and the destruction of their Ukrainian identity by genocide will be a step towards punishing Russia for its crimes against Ukrainian children, a step towards obtaining justice for the committed genocide. And I want to only thank you for supporting us, for standing with us, for praying for us. And I am a head of Save Ukraine. We are rescuing kids, we're returning them, and we recovering them and rebuild their lives. And I'm so grateful. German organization who's supporting us. It's we are all Ukrainians organization and the municipality of Hamburg who are helping, city of Hamburg who helping us too. And you can easily help Ukraine, help us to act with us, not to express concerns, but act, because this is Ukrainian children. They are hostages on the land of enemy, and they want to be home. And I understand that every day we are losing thousands of children. I clearly understand that it's Russia obligation. They oblige to take all kids back. It doesn't matter when the active war or after the war. But because propaganda, because brainwashing, because militarization and weaponizing children, and we are losing these children. And who knows how many thousands young adults who've been school children in Donbass and Crimea 10 years ago died as Russian soldiers on Ukrainian land, fighting with the European Union, fighting with NATO, fighting with Nazi, because they've been brainwashed before. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right now we have a chance to ask the question. Katerina Demirza will moderate the question, so you can easily raise the hands, and also you are able to raise the question to ask a question if you want in Ukrainian. We have a translator as well. Meanwhile, okay, we have a question, Katerina.
Thanks. Yeah. Yes, I wanted to ask all the time when I heard Mr. Kuleba, what can we do here in Berlin concretely to support you?
If I understand right, that your wish is to support us,
yes.
You can easily go to our website, saveukraine.org. It's here, saveukraine.org, and support us. And welcome to Ukraine. I'm in Kiev. I'll be happy to visit. Yeah. Or maybe anywhere I'll come to Germany. Sometimes I'm going there.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Do we have the next question?
So, can you hear me all right? Yeah? So my question is for Dr. Hellestveit. You said after the end of the war that Russia has an obligation to transfer these children back to Ukraine. So my question is, if they become adults according to the law during the war, does that affect how do we say, former children are dealt with? Is Russia freed from its obligation once stolen Ukrainian children become brainwashed, Russified adults?
Thank you for this question, a very pertinent one. Now, this is one of the reasons why this is an ongoing crime that is getting more serious by the day. So it is unlike most war crimes. You destroy a village, you kill civilians, you destroy infrastructure. It is irreversible. And it is grave from the very beginning. Now, this type of war crime becomes more serious with time. And it is not irreversible, but at some point it becomes irreversible because you lose the children to the enemy belligerent. Now, these are absolute rules. There are no exceptions. And why is that? It is because it is prohibited to forcefully mobilize enemy civilians. You cannot force a Ukrainian under occupied territory to participate in the enemy army. It is prohibited. It is a war crime. Now, the problem is that then you can take the children and you can change them. And by the time they are grown-ups, they can do it. So the absolute prohibition to deport or forcefully transfer children without their parents, unaccompanied children, is because you don't want states to get around that prohibition. So, and this touches upon your question, because of course, when these children are grown-ups and they believe that they are Russians, they believe that their families are enemies, they believe that their nation, their state, is their enemy, you can say that they are lost. And that is basically the core of the crime. It doesn't change the fact that they are supposed to be returned for as long as they live. But still, this becomes more severe as time passes by. But just let me say one thing. It is not when the war ends that Russia has the obligation to return these children. Russia has the obligation to return them immediately. When they have been medically evacuated, there are merits to some of the Russian arguments about these children being brought out of zones of hostilities. Okay, but once you get them into your hands, that is when your obligation to bring them out of your own hands arises. And this brings me to an important thing, because these war crimes that we are talking about take place in a war between two states. We are not used to that. We have hardly had any wars like that over the past 3 decades. 95% of the armed conflicts in the world are common Article 3 situations. We don't have these rules in the same way. But when you have wars between two states, third countries also have duties. All countries in the world, I mean, all states in the world are under an explicit obligation to facilitate that these children are taken out of Russian hands and kept in third countries until they can be returned to Ukraine. So, and this is going back also to the question being asked, what can we do? Well, all states in the world have a duty under the rules of the Geneva Conventions to facilitate, to change the situation of these children, because it becomes more and more severe as time passes by for the exact reasons that you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have the next question? We have there.
Thank you so much. It's a very serious issue that, I don't know, not really talked. So I was watching this interview with Maria Belova, and she was talking to a foreign reporter. And when asked about, so you've been accused of deporting Ukrainian children, what do you say to that? And she said, well, I adopted this boy from Mariupol, and well, Russia is not part of International Criminal Court, so we don't really have to listen to them. And yeah, there are things that, yeah, they should send the children back, right? Immediately, like as fast as possible. Yes, they should do this, this, and this, but they should do many things, and they don't do those things, right? So I'm just curious, is there like actually any accountability that they can be held to? Any I don't know, organization or institutional body, international body that can actually bring them to any consequences, or is it just hoping that states will be united and push Russia through sanctions or whatever else to bring those children back? Thank you.
Thank you again. I guess that question was
Yes,
addressed
international
to me.
law, it means we need the expert
Now-
to this.
Now, this is the very difficult question about the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. As you know, Russia is not a member of the court, has not ratified. So it does not directly have jurisdiction over what Russian authorities are doing in Russia. Except in this case, because Ukraine, of course, has invited the International Criminal Court in to have jurisdiction on its territory. But the Ukraine does not really have the authority to give jurisdiction over Russia. Whatever the Russian belligerent is doing on Ukrainian territory, the International Criminal Court can prosecute. But that is not what it has done in this case. It has prosecuted, or it has indicted, I'm sorry. It has an arrest warrant on two Russian, the president and Belova, for acts done primarily in Russia. But that follows these children. And this is what happens to these children. When they are deported from Ukrainian territory, unaccompanied, into Russia, the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court will follow the children. And this is why you can therefore have arrest warrants for how these children are being treated in Russia. It basically expands the jurisdiction of the court. And I do want to emphasize again, the most important thing about the rules here under the laws of armed conflict is that these are rules with no exceptions. There are very few rules, again, under the laws of war that are entirely without exceptions. But children unaccompanied shall not, cannot, must not stay in the hands of the belligerent party, and that is basically why the ICC has jurisdiction in this case, because the system transferring the children from Ukrainian territory into Russia, no system for transferring the children back to Ukraine or to third countries. So that is basically how this is solved. So the ICC has jurisdiction. In this case, unlike in many other issues on Russian territory. So that is also some of the issues that makes this case special. But again, this is a very grave crime, precisely because it instrumentalizes the children. And international law of war does everything it can to protect the children from that specific type of crime.
We definitely wish International Criminal Court to get justice, to make justice. We have a chance for one last question. Katerina, as the moderator, will choose who will be. I mean, Katerina is moderator, so she will decide who is the next. And definitely there's like many open questions to how actually justice should be done, and the legal part of this. Would this Russian war of aggression against Ukraine bring the new maybe concept of the prosecution, not just a genocide? That's the open question for all of us. And right now, Katerina, give the microphone.
2 weeks ago, I think I had this honor to see the presentation in U.S. Embassy. They showed a presentation, a report about abducting of Ukrainian children, and it was prepared by the State Department, and it was, I mean, as I understood, it's this work in Yale University. It's like your common work of Ukrainian side and US State Department. And there were two things that are very interesting for me, and I would like to ask about that. So there is a first part, they mentioned also in terms of these all atrocities that there are premises about two kind of way why they abduct children. First is that in these occupied territories, many times they notice that people who in families which are very much for Ukraine, or they are patriotic, or the parents did anything that shows that they are Ukrainians, as a punishment they abduct children. And this is something which is very it's harrowing, and very, I think, very special to mention. And do you have many records on that? And the second, which they stress, that it's like that they receive first records, first testimonies that they show that some of the children, Ukrainian children, are used in medical experiments. And it's like that they cannot confirm right now, but it's like something that they see that it's not 100%. Can you also comment that? And the second part of this question, or two questions, is that there was this tension during this, of the understanding what international community can do. It's a tension in this answer of this question, because on the one hand, every time they say, and you say, every day, we know, yes, every day counts, yes, because it's like we have to act right now. And on the other hand, they said, when we were asking, okay, how they collect all these testimonies, that they have also people in different places in Russia, in Belarus, who transfer information and they are in danger, and so on and so on. And sometimes, and they said, we cannot give precise information. We cannot, for example, immediately alarm, because sometimes it makes Russians that they speed up, and they did it, that these children disappear. So it's like, how do you, we have to act, we have to react, we have to do, yes, make this public more and more important. But on the other hand, do you feel that the reaction of Russia is that they make more and more these crimes? That they speed up what they planned?
I would then separate this couple questions. The first one about the testimonies and the medical experiment, I would address to Mr. Kuleba. If I may ask to comment on these testimonies, if there were some cases like that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will start just a little. You told about intent, about many journalists asking me, why Russia doing this? Why Putin needs children? My answer is very simple. First, to erase Ukrainian identity, because it's very easy to annihilate identity, nationality in children. Number two, Russia has a huge demographic problem. They need children, they need population, they need Ukrainian population to brainwash them to erase identity and to have more population. Three, weaponize children, weaponize them through the military, different military movements, through the propaganda. They weaponizing our kids. It's three things. Remember, just annihilate identity, to demographic issues, and weaponize children, use them as soldiers. Three main things. Yeah, and another things about these experiments, I have no information. I heard many times, but because these children are hostages there, they can do whatever you want, everything. They can sell them for organs, everything they can do with these children, because they have no rights in Russia state. No any rights. And your question, what can we do? I told some, but I'm in 25 years in child protection in Ukraine. I couldn't imagine then I will ask somebody about a weapon, about fighting with somebody, but I'm begging you, help us fight, help us with weapon, help us with financial support, help us with everything, because Ukraine now is a battlefield. Because these children who've been brainwashed and now fighting with us, they believe they are fighting with you, with Europe, with the NATO, with Americans, with the Nazi, and next will be you. Putin will never stop. He wanna come back to empire. He wanna show everybody that he's strong and he has the power and everybody should obey him. We should stop him. Thank you.
Thank you. And the second part, I will readdress a bit. As I wrote Moscow Connection report, there was impression, as maybe I was wrong, that you were collecting all data for this report by not like getting a resource or information from Russia itself. So by this, and also by working with the international organization, to readdress this question, do you see that the reaction of Russia when you're trying to stop like their action, to spotlight this action, to stress what they are doing, the crime which they are committing, they making vice versa, they are not stopping, they speed up their action?
I think that that is a danger. However, I would like to stress again that this is not an obligation that is limited to Western countries. All countries, all ratifying parties to the Geneva Conventions, again, all parties in the world, also those states who have decided not to side with Ukraine in this war of aggression, they are also bound to pressure Russia to respect these rules. They're also bound to facilitate the transfer of the Ukrainian children to third countries out of the hands of the Russian belligerent via third countries with whom Russia may have cooperation. They have the same obligation. And again, these are obligations that are not so much like, for instance, some of the other obligations under international law. These are very specific obligations that are in the interests of all countries in the world to uphold. And I mean, while the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine is one of the major conflicts between states that we have had in modern times, there are indications that we are heading for a world where interstate armed conflict is becoming more common, unfortunately, because these are very brutal wars. And that means that all states of the world have a self-interest in making sure that these rules that are there to protect all of us from hell on earth, all states have an interest in actually pressuring the two belligerents, the Russians in this case, to actually respect these rules. And I think that is an important thing to take along in this campaign to try to bring the children home, or at least out of Russian hands. That these are rules that every single state in the world has a self-interest to make sure that the Russian belligerent is respecting.
And by this, I will finish this discussion that bringing Ukrainian kids back home, it's the interest of each state. That's the interest if we believe in the democracy in the future. I thank our panelists for joining us. I thank our audience for staying for us. And I thank our participants of the discussion. That's Mykola Kuleba, founder of Save Ukraine, a Ukrainian social and political activist and former presidential commissioner for children's rights. That's Alla Tarasiuk, head of the Department for Monitoring of the Rights of the Child. That's our panelists, which with us in the body here on this panel, on the middle of the heart of Germany and the heart of Berlin, Anastasia Saienko, representative of the initiative Where Our People. And Dr. Cecilie Hellestveit, a lawyer and social scientist with a PhD in international humanitarian law from the University of Oslo, involved in the USA Moscow Mechanism mission. And I would like to invite you, as we promised, you will have a small curatorial tour through the exhibition, which you have seen already as you pass to this hall, that's War Diaries. And right now I'm inviting the organizer, the initiator and curator of this exhibition, Hrystyna Hranovska, to the small words, and then she will lead you to the exhibition, to her tour through the exhibition.
So I will read this. I will do it this way. Dear guest, last week, the whole family was killed in Kharkiv as a result of Russian shelling. The parents, mom, dad, and their 3 children were burned to death in their own home. The oldest, Oleksii, was 7 years old. The middle one, Mikhailo, was 4 years old, and the youngest one, Pavlo, was only 10 months old. And while we are standing here, Russia is destroying our children's childhood. Our project, our exhibition, War Diaries, the Unheard Voices of Ukrainian Children, is a collection of 14 stories, 14 children destroyed life. But in reality, there are thousands of them, and each of them are full with incredible pain. So today we are happy to present it to you, and it's a great honor for us to have the opportunity to present the project in Berlin, so that the voices of Ukrainian children can be heard. Now, I will read you a part from a diary from our participant Violeta Gorbachova. February 24, 22, 4:50 a.m., when exactly the war was started. I woke up because my house was shaking. I almost fell out of bed, so I got out of bed right away. War was my first thought. I feel sad even that I realized everything at once. There had been a talk for a month about the possibility of Russian invasion, but I didn't believe it, because I believe in civilization. I was wrong. It doesn't exist everywhere. I started looking for my parents in our apartment to ask them what to do. They opened the kitchen window to at least see something. They felt the air vibrating. I went to wake up my sister, my older sister, but I was running because I was shocked. The explosion continued. I thought that the bombs were falling from airplanes and that they couldn't fall on our house at any moment. We opened the curtains in our room, and I just froze on the spot. Until that moment, we were not sure if those were really explosions. Now it was for sure, unfortunately. The war in Ukraine has been going on for 2 almost years now. Every day, Russia destroys the childhood of our children. They lose their parents. They lose their possibility to study. They are studying in shelters, wake up with air alarms and explosion. That is why we are here. That is why we would like to show you everyday life of our Ukrainian children. And I would like to invite you and to have a small presentation of the exhibition. And Slava Ukraini! Let's go.